Genevieve Bell, you obviously take great pride in leading the ANU at this time, but considering its finances, policies of government and staff morale, amongst other issues, is it an institution in crisis at the moment?
Wow, what a leading question. Look, I think the ANU is an extraordinary place, and it's a privilege to be its steward. But you're right, it's an institution that has an enormous number of challenges. Some of them are challenges beyond our making. Government policy settings, economic circumstances. Some of them are things that we are on a journey for ourselves. We have a financial situation where we spend more money than we earn, and anyone who's ever run a household budget knows that isn't good. And fixing that requires change, and change is always difficult. Well,
let's try and cover those elements you mentioned there. You are driving ahead with a painful restructure process. It's even got a name, Renew ANU. It's hitting a lot of resistance. In the broad, would you say more than you had originally anticipated?
Look, I think when you have to make the kind of changes we're making, so we were living far outside of our means as an institution, and we need to think about all of the way we spend and the way we turn up in conversations, because we need to be responsible for the money that we have. Did I think there'd be resistance to it? Sure, change is always difficult. Did I think there'd be as much as we have? Yeah, I think we probably all collectively imagined that as a leadership team, and so we keep going on the journey.
Can we break this down and do it by the numbers? What is the annual budget saving that you are chasing? We've seen various figures reported. It'd be good to get the latest estimate on the record.
Sure. The university needs to make a $250 million reduction in its recurring costs, so the amount of money that the university spends every year. That $250 million comes in two pieces. One, a reduction in non-salary spend, so all the things that you do that aren't about paying people's salaries, and then $100 million in salary spend. And we need to achieve that by the end of this year.
Okay, so break it down into salary. What is the estimated number of positions that will need to be made redundant?
Look, I know that's a question everyone asks, and the reality is there are lots of things that make up that $100 million, and there are lots of ways we can think about achieving that. For us, it's been hugely important to focus on things that we can do before we get to headcount reduction. So how do we ensure that people are taking the leave? We had an incredibly big leave liability when I became vice-chancellor, and that was sitting on our books. We know that it's important to think about all the other pieces of the puzzle for us. So at the moment we have a voluntary separation scheme that's running, and we will see where that lands us.
But where is that at now?
So we announced that voluntary separation scheme, gosh, I want to think almost a month ago. Expressions of interest, so it was an expressions of interest driven scheme, so put your hand up to say that you were interested. And there were some conditions around it. You needed to be a continuing employee of the university, but it also needed to be a position you were in that the university could make redundant. One of the things we discovered when we did this back in 2020 was that we had a voluntary separation scheme but didn't make the positions redundant afterwards, and then ended up hiring a whole lot of people back in 2021-22. So we're trying not to make that mistake again for us.
I see. So we've seen publicly reported estimates of 650 positions by the time you've completed this process. Does that sound about right?
Look, I know that's a number that the union likes to bandy around, but the reality is every person at the university has a different value for the university, for the work they do, for the ways we think about what needs to happen, and for the work that needs to be done. And so for us it's about making sure that we are scoping out a university footprint, not driven by a headcount number.
But you must have run some estimates around headcount, because invariably these dollars are converted into FTE numbers. So if it's not 650, well, you must have a ballpark.
No, the ballpark for me is we need to reduce $100 million in our recurrent expenses. And the reality here is we're not prevaricating as a leadership team, but the average cost of a full-time employee, as you said, an FTE headcount, can range from $150,000 per annum to nearly $500,000. And the range there is extreme if you want to think about how would you convert that to a headcount number. And so for us, it's about making sure that we are setting the university up to continue to be successful. It's hugely important to me and the rest of the leadership team that we're not gutting the place. So it's about making sure that as we make cuts, we're doing them in a sensible way.
So are you determined to have that salary side of the equation fully dealt with by the end of this calendar year?
It's certainly our hope.
Okay, and when would you anticipate being back in operating surplus?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think we would hope to be in operating surplus by 2027 and maybe even to the back end of 2026, but there are lots of variables here for us. This is also about how do we ensure that we are continuing to see student numbers, that we are continuing on the revenue side of the equation, not just the spending side of the equation.
I'll get to student numbers in a moment. Non-salary side of the equation, what have you identified there? Will you, for instance, embark on property sales?
Oh, look, I know everyone wishes we could just sell buildings, and you and I have just spent some time in a glorious one, which would be quite unsaleable in all sorts of ways. Look, for us, the precinct, so the whole of campus, that's not an opportunity for us to sell things. We've certainly exited from leases we held around the perimeter of campus. We've sold land that we acquired 20 years ago with a vision of what we would do with it, which we've never actually sort of acted on. And so in the category of non-salary savings, look, we've done lots of big things and small things. Some of it's just being more efficient about the money we have and being more sensible about it, whether that means ensuring that everyone uses a travel provider, whether it means setting parameters about how you travel, whether it means scrutinising better our subscriptions and all of our spending. We just renegotiated really unsexy stuff, supplies for labs, electricity, resources, so all of those things make a difference. Back
office costs, and have you filled out that target of $150 million?
No, we
How
have
far through?
We have a long way to go on that.
All right. There's been strong pushback. I've identified that. You're well aware of it. There is, as we speak, a vote among staff and community members. A vote of no confidence is the proposition being put. Does that bother you if that comes back as a vote of no confidence, and how would you respond to it?
I think you can sort of take it apart into three pieces, right? It is absolutely a vote. It's an online web form. You could vote yourself if you wanted to, Greg, and as my grandfather used to say, you could actually vote early and vote often. So it's a vote. And I understand what it's about, right? My colleagues in the NTU joke sometimes in public that it's also a membership drive, so I see it for what it is. And the reality is, like, look, I grew up in Australia. I really believe in the importance of unions. I think they're an important way to ensure a safe and well-regulated workforce. I think they're really important that way. But I also know that it wouldn't be surprising to have a union say they didn't want a boss in charge. So am I surprised that there'll be a vote of no confidence? No. Am I surprised it'll be comprehensively against me? No. And
you resigned to that. Sounds like you're quite dismissive of it.
No, let me be clear. I'm not dismissive of the fact that people are concerned about their livelihoods and their jobs. I am dismissive of the tactics the union has used here, and it's depressing for me at some level, right? We have...
Which ones in particular?
Well, look, I think we have such a lot of work to do here, and I would really like to have all of our unions at the table with us while we do that work. And running a no confidence campaign, which has been, by their own admission, personal. It's been a reputational campaign targeted at me. My face is plastered all over it in ways that they never did with my predecessor.
How do you feel about that?
Now, sexism's alive and well and living in Australia, so it's a little bit of tall poppy syndrome activity.
You think some of their tactics are driven by the fact that you're a woman and you're being targeted for that reason?
Absolutely.
And have you requested that cease or desist? Do you have that sort of dialogue with them?
Oh, we've absolutely asked them to stop and they haven't. But again, I understand this as the necessary way these things unfold. But what will happen on Thursday when there's a comprehensive no vote? I will be in meetings doing my job, and what will happen on Friday, I'll be in meetings doing my job, and I have 3 years and 9 months left to run on my contract, and I plan to see them out. And frankly, the longest serving Vice-Chancellor at the Australian National University never made it to 10 years, so I think I might give that a whirl too. All
right, you assert that on the basis that you have, unanimous support among those who could hire and fire you, and that is the Council of the University?
The Council has made very clear they back me.
Okay, let's talk about your leadership style, Genevieve, and the structure of this university with historically 7, I think soon to be 6 colleges. Are you asserting your authority over the deans of those colleges?
It's an interesting question. So the colleges are a relatively new, by the university standard, activity that didn't come into existence until about 20 years ago, which I know doesn't sound like new to most of us, but by university standards, 2024 to 2020 is a relatively recent construct. So the colleges are a relatively new construct. We're already down to 6 colleges. We made those changes at the beginning of the year. And one of the things I'm really clear about is that we have a broad leadership team. We brought in a provost for the first time in a little while. We have a team of remarkable people who steward this university. The deans are each for themselves accountable for their parts of the university. But ultimately, it does stop with me. I'm the person that holds the responsibility for the place. And so it's not about asserting power so much as wanting to make sure that we flow accountabilities appropriately.
Are they as responsive on those accountabilities to you as you would wish, the deans?
I have inherited a remarkable collection of deans. I'm incredibly lucky. There are people in all of those roles who care about their communities, who care about the ANU, who know we're on a hard journey and are on that journey collectively.
Because there has been a quote attributed to you by an unnamed colleague conveying it to the Australian Financial Review that says, "I am Vice-Chancellor and with me the deans work for me," I think is the quote. Is that a true reflection of your attitude towards the hierarchy and the chain of command here?
Well, it's certainly absolutely the case that I have had to say at this university, the deans work for me, not the other way around.
And how does that rest with them? Have you explored that? Are they accepting of that?
Look, I know for a whole lot of people I'm a very different leader than my predecessor. And that's been a long, interesting, complicated set of conversations that we're having. But people do understand that ultimately I'm the one who makes the decisions here, but I like to try and make them as collectively as we can.
Are you having difficulty asserting your authority? I mean, you just stated it there very clearly, but are you encountering problems in those conversations you referred to?
No, I don't believe so.
Have you ever got to a position where you thought it's either they go or I go with any particular dean?
Oh, I sort of think if you're a CEO, you often have a moment of thinking to yourself, oh, is this really what I've signed up for? Maybe I should go. So I think you'd be crazy if you didn't wake up on a semi-regular basis and think, oh my goodness, it's a big job. Because it is a big job.
I'm going to move on to a very important aspect of university life, which is, of course, the students. One more on, I suppose, your own career path and salary, which has been publicly reported. If you could, Genevieve, clear up some reporting late last year regarding what was, until about November, your ongoing employment arrangement with Intel, your former employer in the United States back in the day. There is, I think, understandable interest in that. Did you pick up ongoing salary until that termination, and did you get any form of severance pay?
So it's absolutely the case that I worked for Intel in the time that I came home from Australia. It was well known here. It was disclosed to my management changed throughout the time before I became Vice-Chancellor, and it was disclosed when I took the role as Vice-Chancellor. It was known to the Chancellor, who is my boss in that sense, and it was disclosed through all the paperwork. As you can imagine, it's a large American company, so I'm covered by an NDA there, so I can't really talk about the financial pieces of the puzzle. But in the time that I was Vice-Chancellor, so from the 1st of January 2024 to the 15th of November 2024, I worked about 24 hours for Intel in that period, and I received slightly less than $70,000.
And you retained that? Do you have any difficulty accepting that? Would you, for instance, donate it to a charity for the purpose of, perhaps the appearance and the difficulty of the industrial debate that you're having on campus at the moment?
I took a 10% pay cut in October of last year because I knew there were difficulties in our community. I donate to various funds inside the university and beyond the university.
Okay, but the $70,000 is, for all intents and purposes, yours?
Indeed.
Okay, let's move on to students, and thank you for addressing that. How are enrolments looking this year?
Oh, look, this year's been kind of amazing. So one of the things that's always remarkable for me is, as much as the debate swirls around universities about the value of universities, people still come. And so we've had more domestic, so people who come from Australia, more domestic undergraduates accept offers and come here than we've ever had before. It's extraordinary, and they all turned up, 6 weeks ago now. So they're safely ensconced in their various classes. International numbers are good for us.
Are you aware, since the caps issue was kind of neutered politically, are you aware of visa applications not being progressed or even rapidly progressed as an instrument of control on international student enrolments at this campus? Has that occurred?
So depending on the season and the year, we have seen visa applications happen at various speeds. At the moment, they're within the kind of acceptable tolerances for us. So if you were to apply, you will end up here. So no, we haven't seen a slowdown that way.
But had caps come in, the estimate was that ANU would have taken about a 15% reduction in international student numbers. Correct me if that doesn't accord with your understanding.
That doesn't accord with my understanding. So for us, the federal caps were really designed to set international student numbers. The hope was 40 was the ceiling, and we were somewhere between 39 to 41% at that time. We're now at about 35% for this semester.
And what's that doing for the budget?
For last year, that was part of the challenge for us financially. You asked me about the finances earlier. One of the challenges for us was that we came into 2024 with a budget that had been set by my predecessor that really relied on tremendous growth in international and indeed domestic student numbers, and we didn't see those in 2024. So part of our challenge continues to be that there are constraints on revenue.
Can you live with ministerial direction, which is the visa control mechanism on international students at present? You happy to operate under that regime for the foreseeable future?
We're happy to continue to collaborate with the government and their policy settings. For us, it's always a matter of making sure that those settings are well understood and that we're consulted in them, and we have been.
Let's go to a country you know and understand as well as Australia, which is, of course, the US. Its college system, like everything in the US, it's going through some upheaval at the moment with the Trump administration, perhaps the DOGE initiative thrown in as well. ANU has already publicly acknowledged the loss of one research project due to new guidance or policies of the Trump administration. Have you yet gathered a full understanding of the extent of
I have.
research projects that could be affected by a US withdrawal?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to say here that, much like I imagine you and in your sector, we're watching this unfold in real time. And so it's always a little hard to predict what will happen next. We had, at the beginning of March, 16 research grants on foot with American funding agencies to the tune of about $10 million Australian, kind of give or take fluctuations in the exchange rate. One of those research grants has indeed been terminated by, in this case, the Department of Homeland Security. We have 15 more on foot. We have not had any notification or any sense that the rest of them are vulnerable currently.
What was the value of the one that was cancelled?
About $500,000 US.
And what gives you confidence that the remaining 15, if you have such confidence, won't be affected?
Look, I think any one of us who has a funding ecosystem, there's always a little bit of de-risking that you can do. For us at the moment, where the US government's focus has not been on the areas that the 15 remain in. But we're working to make sure that the researchers who are investigators on those projects are well supported and well scaffolded.
Leaving the dollars aside, though, the US federal administration is clearly engaged in a purge of what the President would daily describe as woke agendas. These, well, according to the questions that were put to Australian universities, include adherence to free speech principles, anti-Americanism and anti-Christian teachings as well. If you were to comply with these for the sake of ongoing research collaboration, wouldn't that be an affront to academic freedoms so revered and respected in this country?
So, Greg, I don't think we're about to comply with a set of policies we can't comply with. We have had no one that we're aware of receive that questionnaire, and the funds that we still have on foot don't seem yet to have fallen into the category of things that are being so aggressively scrutinised. But you're absolutely right. One of the things that is remarkable about universities and hugely important about it is academic freedom, and maintaining that will really matter for us.
But if there were further incursions, would you readily give up a research funding agreement with a US agency in order to respect academic freedoms on this campus?
I imagine the academics on this campus would want to do that, and we would support them in doing that.
All right. From the point of view of US innovation, which you're very familiar with, Silicon Valley you know so well, what the Trump administration is doing on trade, America first, government efficiency, what do you think it means for the tech sector and US innovation? Could it be a net positive for them, or do you despair about this trend?
Oh, look, the America I spend a long time in feels very distant now. The Silicon Valley I spent much of my career in feels very distant too. I tend to think one of the things that made Silicon Valley remarkable was the flow of ideas and the flow of people, and the fact that it was a place in the time that I was there that really encouraged a diversity of ideas, a diversity of ways of thinking and being. And I look at the state it is in now, and I wonder if that is going to be a place that innovation will occur at quite the rate that it did.
So that's on a personnel and work rights policy front, is it?
Well, I think it's also, you know, Silicon Valley's always had a really strong collection of people who weren't raised there. I'm one of them. Many of my colleagues came from elsewhere in the world, and so I think there's a little bit of people with different lived experiences, people from different places brought new ideas there and incubated them, and I can see that will get a little bit harder.
What about on the trade front? Could it be protective, if not nurturing, of US-funded tech ventures? I mean, Elon Musk, after all, is right in the middle of this.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the things that it is easy to pass over in all of this is the complexity of global supply chains, which also doesn't sound very sexy. But the reality is, to make a piece of technology in the 21st century, you are pulling on ideas and actual physical stuff from usually all over the world. And getting to a place where you're saying actually it needs to be sovereignly produced only is a really complicated proposition. So I look at some of the pieces around tariffs and think it is a very blunt instrument indeed.
Unachievable?
I think it's a blunt instrument.
Okay. Will any of these endeavours from the US, and we've discussed them, are they likely to exacerbate ANU's slide in research rankings?
Ah, yes, another piece of the puzzle that we need to work on too. Look, we are really committed to doing a better job in the global rankings. For us, that's about making sure that we do the things and do them well, that we do good research, that we teach well, that our students find good roles in the world. Those are the things that the rankings are determined by. The perturbations in the United States, I think it is not yet clear how those are going to play out for universities, because as you say, a lot of American universities now find themselves in very different places than they were even 2 months ago, and I think we're going to see a lot more complexity there.
And as far as the ANU's agenda to arrest this decline here, irrespective of what happens in the United States, you've got a plan for that?
I do. One of the things that's been quite remarkable about becoming Vice-Chancellor is bringing on a whole lot of new people to the leadership team, and we have a really strong Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor Research and Innovation, another mouthful, but basically the person who helps drive all of that, and he has a strong plan and I have a lot of confidence in it.
All right. So just a final reflection, I suppose. You came to this job with lots of cred around looking into the future and what that's like. Do you see any contradiction, perhaps irony, in the fact that the wrestle you immediately confront is very much in the weeds around, you know, budget and the issues we've discussed here today, rather than the rosy future you might wish to be creating?
Well, you know, the good news here is that I spent the bulk of my career getting to do both things, right? Thinking about the day-to-day and the business pieces and working out how to think through really very uncool things like policies and regulations and financial controls. And I'm good at all of that stuff. And when we move through all of this, the university will continue to have a rosy future. I'm really committed to that. And that's the piece that keeps me going every day.
Any regrets?
No.
Well, I think the Times might have chosen you more than you chose these times, Genevieve Bell, but we'd love to cover your journey through the years ahead in this occupation. You've been generous with your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Craig.